Welcome back to the Cheap Heat Productions podcast. Welcome back to the show, and today on the show I have an absolutely amazing guest joining us all the way from the States, Mr. Chris Hansen. How are you doing today?
Good, Maurice. How are you?
I am doing very well. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I sent in a few fan questions, and obviously you're probably going to tell me what is the one question that people wanted to ask me to ask you first?
Well, it's going to be a tie between, can you tell me to have a seat right over there? Or were there ever any moments where you really thought you were going to get hurt during the Predator investigations? Or maybe sometimes people ask, was there anything you couldn't show? That's a very popular question, and a good question at that.
I think I've got all those in there, but the most important one was, why don't you have a seat?
Exactly.
So they said you have to ask him, but I said he's going to be sitting down when I'm talking to me. It doesn't matter.
Sometimes you have to say it like they did on South Park, you know.
Yeah.
Chris Hansen.
Did you see that episode?
Oh yeah. You know, it's funny because my kids went to high school and with on the East Coast with other kids whose dads were sporting guys and business guys and Wall Street guys, and so to have a dad on TV was it was no big deal until South Park did a Chris Hansen To Catch a Predator episode. Then that was cool, Dad. After that.
Did it annoy you in any way the way it was
portrayed?
No,
they didn't. They don't tell you beforehand, right? And mm-hmm. Those guys are very clever guys and smart guys, and I appreciate their humor, and I watch the show when I can. And so I get a call from my agent, one of my agents. I was on the West Coast on assignment, and he says, South Park is doing you tonight. He texts me, and he says, it's pretty funny. And then about 20 minutes later, it's taken a dark turn. No, look, do this for 40 years, and, especially with the Predator franchise, which is, undoubtedly cutting edge stuff. And of course, when something becomes, that popular and part of pop culture, people are going to poke fun at you. And I never minded it because in my mind, it brings attention to a very important cause, which is, understanding the mind of a criminal or a predator and hearing the voice of a victim. And I think any time, whether it's funny or satire or criticism for that matter, that it brings attention to that cause, it helps protect people from becoming victims. So I'm good with it all.
You got off a lot lighter than we'll say Tiger Woods did anyway.
Or Tom Cruise or something.
Yeah. So you're an 8-time Emmy Award winner as well. So
10, actually.
10. Okay, it was 8. It was 8 when I checked it earlier.
It's I won 2 today. No, I'm kidding, but there's people get that confused all the time. It's fine. I'm just teasing you.
Oh, Grant. Okay, so my research is not too bad so far. I want to know about your journey into journalism before all of this TV stuff came in. What's your background like?
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up in suburban Detroit, and our home was about 1.5 miles from where Jimmy Hoffa, the union leader, was last seen, where he had lunch that day. And it was a big story when he disappeared. And there were police up there and FBI agents and reporters from the local TV stations in Detroit and ultimately the networks. And I used to ride my bike up there because the whole thing fascinated me and watch what was going on and followed it closely on the local news. And I sort of got bit by the bug then, as I followed this enduring mystery, what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. And so when I went to college, I signed up for the radio station on campus and worked there, and was lucky enough to get into commercial radio. Then my senior year in school, I actually got a job at the NBC affiliate as a television reporter, and I was off to the races after that. So it's really, I mean, besides hauling drywall and being a baker's apprentice, it's pretty much all I've ever done.
Yeah. It's kind of like anyone you talk to, I talk to people in different industries and things. It's all about timing, isn't it? And a bit of luck.
Well, it is. It is. It's about hard work. It's about, having the fire in your belly, the competitive nature, and it's about being curious, most important. But there's a lot of luck, and I'm the recipient of a lot of very fortunate circumstances and timing, and some of it is just being available and being, devoted to the job. But yeah, I mean, I've been at the right place at the right time and seized opportunities and taken some risks that paid off. And absolutely, you got to be a little lucky. My second oldest is a television reporter, and he's really good, better than I was at that age. And so I tell people he's got the talent. Now we just got to see how lucky he gets.
Yeah. In my first memories of you, obviously, was here in Ireland, and we seen clips of To Catch a Predator, and it was really, like, it was cutting edge in the States, and I think it was ahead of its time. But like, America is much more advanced and ahead of Ireland in terms of things like that. We found it absolutely kind of unbelievably shocking, really, the way that you could do that and set guys up, because in this country it's all about protection and data.
Oh yeah,
different things like that. How did you guys, like, you pitched the show? It was your idea, is that correct?
It is. I had been in a conversation with a buddy of mine who was a reporter, and he asked if I had heard of this online watchdog group called Perverted Justice, and we contacted Perverted Justice, and I thought, well, if we could combine their ability to go online and pose as 12, 13, 14-year-old kids as decoys in chat rooms, and combine that with our ability to have a house wired with hidden cameras and microphones, it could be pretty compelling. And so I pitched it, and a lot of smart people weighed in on it on our team, and we went out and did it. And I didn't pitch this as a series. I thought it'd be, a one-off, an interesting story for Dateline NBC. And so we did it, and I'm on my way out to the location in Long Island, New York, and I'm thinking, God, what if I just, spent tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money and nobody shows up? And with that, my producer calls and says, two guys are due in 45 minutes. Where the hell are you? And traffic cleared, and I got there, and it was one after the other for 2.5 days, and 17 fellows surfaced, including a New York City firefighter. And we were pretty much overwhelmed with this. We had all this material, and we're trying to figure out the best way to present it, and we worked on it for several months, and it aired, and it predictably got a lot of attention. So we figured, well, we'll do it one more time. I honestly thought we'd do it maybe 2 or 3 times, and then nobody would show up. I mean, guys would get hip to it. But 17 years after that very first investigation, I mean, we were out a couple months ago in Michigan, and prison guard showed up, a corrections officer for the state of Michigan, a contractor who had done work in the governor's office, a former police officer from Lebanon. I mean, guys keep showing up, and we're getting ready to launch not only just the continuing series we've had on the YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, but we're getting ready to launch another version of the television series. And the technology has changed. I mean, Maurice, when we started this, we merely used chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo. And today, the number of social media platforms upon which predators can approach kids has exploded. It's endless. It seems like every month there are new ones, and especially during the pandemic, when so many kids were online so often, there was so much more opportunity for this stuff to happen. And even the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children will tell you that in the months of the pandemic, the number of children approached by predators online soared, so it's more important than ever before. And that's why we launched, the podcast Predators I've Caught, because we get into these previous cases and we talk to people who are involved in the effort. And I think, again, anytime you can get into the mind of a predator and try to understand how that works and how to better protect kids, it's beneficial.
And how many arrests have you guys made to date from doing that work?
We are right around 400, if not a few more. And the conviction rate is very, very high. We've had very few guys get away without being convicted or pleading guilty or no contest. So a lot of guys have paid the price for it, for their activity, ranging from, as I said, probation to, I think the highest sentence was 24 years in prison. And it depends a lot on what the guy's history is too. If he's got previous convictions, we've had some guys surface who have been convicted of this behavior before.
And would a lot of it depend on the state as well, because America's laws are so different in states?
Yeah, that's true. In some states, and especially early on when it was viewed more as a television show than an official law enforcement investigation, I think there was more of a temptation for a judge to grant probation. And look, there are some cases where probation is warranted. If you find somebody who's young with no previous history, who, was wrong and committed a crime, but, with the right amount of therapy and probation and monitoring could go straight. And a lot of these guys have gone straight, the younger ones. But it's a case-by-case basis, because you've got others who, have gone back and done it again and have been caught again and, had child porn on their computers and all kinds of different things. So once we started doing the investigations in parallel with law enforcement, you saw the sentences get stiffer.
Was there anything that ever happened that you couldn't air for whatever reason?
We've edited things for content and sensitivity. We always have, I suppose, pushed the limit, because you want people to see what these guys are capable of doing, saying, requesting. But you don't want to offend people and have people not watch it. You don't want to, you want kids to be able to see it, but sitting next to their parents, so they can put it into context. I'm not just responsible to, standards people at a network. I'm responsible to teachers and other parents. And so you want to be sensitive about that, but nothing major. There was no colossal confrontation or anything like that where, we cut it from the show. We limited it for editorial reasons. If we had, we're doing one segment on one part of investigation, we edit depending on what's interesting for us, but no, never anything cut out like that.
So did you ever feel in danger around any of these guys, because you don't know if they're going to come in armed or anything like that, I suppose, as well?
We try to, yeah, it's a great question. We try to do as much background research as possible, and we're pretty good at that. And so is law enforcement, to make sure that, excuse me, that we don't have somebody walk in with a weapon. And if we do think somebody is carrying a weapon or talks about carrying a weapon, then typically the police will arrest that person before they get into the house. We don't want anybody in the house with a weapon. And we have security within the house, and we have law enforcement on the perimeter. So, for what it is, I feel very comfortable with the security. I mean, there's risk, in any kind of reporting that's edgy or when you're out there. So, and you're dealing with bad guys. And so does somebody get desperate and try something? I've looked in a couple of guys' eyes and thought, okay, I'm out of position and there's no barrier in between the predator and myself. This could go, quickly wrong. But
yeah,
you learn how to sort of control it psychologically the best you can. And we do have the upper hand, and we do have the element of surprise. And I think a lot of these guys, quite honestly, Maurice, they want to get caught. They're tired of the secret double life and the sneaking around and all this. And so there's almost a sense of relief sometimes when these guys finally give it all up and tell their story.
What was it like on the first day of filming that show and doing your first couple of stings?
I was just trying to keep my heart, from my throat and in my chest. It's so busy, quite honestly, that you didn't have a chance to get anxious or nervous because, again, those first two, we didn't have law enforcement doing a parallel investigation. We did have security inside the house. A lot of precautions were taken, but And I'd done a lot of spontaneous investigative interviews, in my time up till that point. But this is one-on-one, face-to-face, and you're thinking about it from a security standpoint. Where are the guy's hands? Does he make any sudden moves? You're thinking about it from an editorial standpoint. What do I ask? How do I get inside this guy's head? Anybody can jump out of a back room and create 10 seconds of dramatic video. My job is to get inside this guy's head and have him tell me a story, an interesting story, and to know when he's BSing me.
Yeah.
In these situations, you have the transcripts. But in that first investigation, the first guy came in and, okay, that went fine. The second guy came in, okay, that went fine. And the third guy comes in, and now the transcripts are all over the dining room table. So I come out with the wrong transcript. And I say to this guy, okay, it says here you wanted to do this, that, and the other thing to a 14-year-old girl named Suzanne. No, that's not me. Excuse me, go back. The other 12-year-old girl named Beth. No, it's not me. I'm sorry. 13-year-old named, Jeannie. Yeah, that's me. Okay, great. And when I wrote the book on it, they actually put together a television special to promote the book. And for the first time, they actually edited those three pieces together. And it's quite something, to see, because I've told the story a million times, but to actually watch it and see it cut together, it's, there are undeniably humorous moments in a very dark and serious series of reports. But, you have to tip your hat to that. I mean, it was, you're not doing justice to the big picture of the story.
And it's still television at the end of the day, and
exactly.
You've got a show to make, even as serious as the topic is.
Oh yeah, but you can't cut it out just because there was humor in it. It's dark humor, admittedly, but it's still, that's part of, I think, what made it so popular, and why it's so popular today.
Did you feel a lot safer once the police became involved in the show?
Yeah, and we took honestly a lot of heat for that, because there were some, in the journalistic community who thought we worked too closely with police. Mm-hmm. And I was willing to take that criticism, because I felt that it was, as a television producer, unsatisfying for the viewer to see these guys walk out the door and, down the street. Now, some of those guys were prosecuted later, especially in the suburban Washington, D.C. investigation, the second one we did, the rabbi and some of the others. But, people wanted to see justice. And from a social responsibility standpoint, I thought it was the right thing to do. And I think the vast majority of journalists would agree. But yeah, we took some heat on it for doing that. But we put a lot of time into structuring it. So it was, we were not a tool of the police, and the police were not being used by us. It was, I think we've got it down to a pretty good system, and it's evolved over the years, for practical reasons and for ethical reasons.
You mentioned that you caught people that work in police officers and different people from different walks of life.
Sure.
The one thing I found crazy watching the show was the time that the guy arrived at the house and knew you from being on the train. What are the chances of that in the States happening?
Well, I knew that we were, in an area where, I had lived for a number of years, commuting into the city. I didn't dream or anticipate that somebody I knew from the commuter train between Connecticut and New York City would service in the investigation. And it wasn't a very close friend. It was just somebody who I'd met, in passing,
yeah.
And chatted with. And, there's a club car, or there used to be in the day, where you could, stand in the train and you could get a beverage and a snack. And, it was kind of fun. It was a good way to kill, 45 minutes or an hour on the train from the city back into the suburbs. And so there was a group of people, and there were close friends, and there were some guys on the periphery. And this is one of the guys on the periphery. And, had I passed him on the street, I may or may not have said hello. But he walked into the house, and he recognized me before I recognized him. And he says, his name is Charles Lawrence. He says, no, Chris, it's not what it looks like. And I'm thinking he knows me from TV.
Yeah.
And that's what the guys of the crew thought too. And the more it set in, I was like, wait a minute, that's Charles from the train. And I immediately called a buddy of mine. I said, "Who's the guy, then I described him. He said, "Oh yeah, that's so-and-so." And I said, "Oh my God." So yeah, in fact, it was him. And I called him later. I did. I called him, sometime later when we were doing some follow-up work, and I asked him if he wanted to talk, and he took the call. He decided not to talk, but he acknowledged that it was wrong and a mistake. And he claimed that he didn't have his glasses on and thought the guy said he was 18 instead of 13. I didn't believe that. He found the address okay, so he must have been seeing pretty well that day. But
yeah, his GPS was working that day anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know which GPS was working, but one of them was.
In Ireland, since your show, and the UK, I see a lot of people trying to do kind of what you do, but taking the law into their own hands because they feel like the laws in Ireland and the UK are too soft. So what a lot of these online predator watchdogs do themselves is they'll do the same thing we were talking about, decoys, show up at a place, record a guy and live stream them to Facebook. Have you ever seen any of those from over here in England?
I have seen them, and I think it's dangerous from a couple of standpoints. One, you get into shaming as opposed to reporting, and two, you can get somebody hurt. And the third problem is that many times these cases don't get prosecuted, and they end up interfering with legitimate investigations being conducted by law enforcement. So to me, it's a dangerous situation. And it may sound hypocritical from somebody who's not in law enforcement, who has been involved in these type of investigations, but we have a whole protocol that we follow. So there are no questions about entrapment, and there are no questions about misidentifying somebody or any legitimate claims that the transcript was rigged or changed, or that it was a big misunderstanding. And we know very, very well that this is the guy, this is what the guy texted, and it's all verified, before that person is identified in a show. And it's backed up by law enforcement, and it's checked on a couple different levels. The vigilante groups who do this, many of them, it's shaming, it's dangerous. The people they're exposing many times deserve to be exposed, but they're not going to face justice because of the way they were exposed. So yeah. I think some of them are, noble in their intent, but, they end up getting involved in a situation where they're, bounty hunting for profit, and that's not right.
Yeah, I think, I don't know exactly, but to be guessing, I would imagine the reason they do it was because they see the law maybe is too soft over here, and they'll just go and do it anyway, regardless of the consequences. Like, I'd imagine that probably 99% of these things that they stream and put up online will probably get thrown out of court for things like data protection and entrapment and different things.
I have found nobody in law enforcement who will support vigilantes. I find a lot of people in law enforcement who will agree to do an investigation that I'm involved with. And I was just at CrimeCon last month, and I presented with a fellow who ran one of the ICAC sections in the Midwest. And, he said in his speech, he said, look, we can work with, legitimate media, but these vigilantes are mucking up what we do on a number of different levels. And so it's dangerous, and it doesn't serve justice in most cases.
Do you think the way the show isn't made on NBC, what do you think are the main reasons for that?
In terms of?
In terms of it not being made for NBC anymore.
Oh, well, I think it really came down to a couple things. And I think it really came down to the fact that there was so much competition for that show and the people involved that it drove the cost of making that show up high. And, there's always a certain amount of risk in doing a show like that. But I think at the end of the day, the decision was made that we have all this material that we can repurpose, reuse, recut, and air on MSNBC that costs us absolutely nothing. And we get the same numbers as if we went out and spent $500,000 or $600,000 per investigation to do another one. And I think it really came down to economics. There were some controversies with the show. There was a assistant district attorney who surfaced in the investigation and ultimately committed suicide, not because he knew he was in the investigation, which we still don't think he knew anything about television being involved. We think he was embarrassed to be arrested because he was a prosecutor who had child pornography on his computer. And he knew in Texas that he was going to face 10 years in prison for each child pornographic image. And so, that was at play. I mean, that happened, but we went on to do multiple investigations after that too.
Yeah, you guys weren't at his house, or he wasn't in the Sting house at the time.
He didn't show up he didn't show up at the Sting house, but in Texas, as in most states, the online solicitation constitutes the felony.
Yeah.
So, they don't usually even have to play the video of my confrontation with the guy to get the conviction or the plea. Typically, it's in the chat logs, and that's what does it.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about the tabloids and the way, like, you when you're famous, and there's certain things that happen that we're not going to touch on because I don't feel that they're relevant to this podcast. But what I want to know is, like, how do you feel about, like, the media kind of watching you as a celebrity, and did you think it would ever come to that point in your career?
No, I never really did. And I suppose, that's the price of, having a franchise or a series of reports that gets so much attention. When you step out of the traditional, journalist into this world of catching people, and it becomes somewhat iconic. And I think you're put under more scrutiny. And, I think you become clickbait at some point. And I could teach a master class in it because I see it from both sides. Look, I've done stories that were controversial. I've covered public figures, my entire life. But I've seen some things happen that were just reported that were wholly untrue or stretched or twisted. And I also think that when you go after people, whether it's the traditional predator investigations or whether it's, the most recent series that we did for Discovery Plus, Onision in real life, you're chasing down a predator who has the ability to manufacture an entire misinformation campaign and create a lot of noise and a lot of negative publicity focused on you. And so I think most people, viewers, followers, sift through it, and they understand the commitment I have to my craft, and the rest of it's just, noise. And everybody's allowed to have a personal life, So I don't think it concerns very many people. To me, it's a part of, putting on your armor every day and going to do battle, and it's the kind of reporting I do. So it doesn't concern me. It surprises me sometimes what gets reported and said, and the sloppiness and inaccuracies. That's not the way I was taught to be a journalist.
Yeah, because, like, if you're doing something, you're going to a bar or something, anyone could take out their phone. If I was sitting beside you, I could take out my phone, take a picture of you, and send it for money.
Yeah, and it happens, and you learn to govern your life accordingly because, as much as everybody likes to be social and have fun, you have to live by a different set of rules because things can be misinterpreted, and you learn that. Sometimes the hard way, but it is what it is. Look, I make my living in this venue, so that's part of what goes into it. You can't have it both ways. You can't be, a well-known celebrity journalist who does controversial stories and expect, never to get tagged by the tabloids. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. And so you have to take the good with the bad and use it. As I said, being on South Park doesn't bother me. It bothers me to see something reported on online tabloid that's just absolutely untrue, or cast in the absolute worst light when it was, there was a no big deal, but that's what happens. And that's part of our instant clickbait culture. And so I benefit from it in some cases, and I, see things that are almost unbelievable in some cases.
In normal day-to-day life then for you, like if you're going to the grocery store, you're going down, do you get recognized a lot?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Have you got any funny stories about people recognizing you?
I was in a shop once looking at an item to purchase. It was a last minute Christmas gift. And the fellow's got sweat pouring out of his forehead. And I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "You don't have a hidden camera on me right now." I said, "No, man, I'm just trying to get a gift here. I'm not trying to sting you, But it's, you get recognized. It's flattering, there are funny stories. So, not far from where I live, there's in New York City, there's a gentleman's club, and the fellow who's the doorman. And when I was doing Crime Watch Daily, actually the set was outdoors, not far from there. And we used to joke, that's the official gentleman's club of Crime Watch Daily. Ha 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 ha. Mm-hmm. And I passed there frequently on the way to the grocery store, on the way to Whole Foods. And so the fellow who's a doorman is a retired NYPD guy, or one who's moonlighting. And we get chatty. And he's a great guy. And he said, "Look, if you ever need security work," I said, "Look, yeah, I'll, give me your number. I'll keep you in mind." So when I passed there, the guy was, "Hey, Chris," and it's like, "Well, how do they know you at the gentleman's club?"
A lot of explaining to do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're friends from the police force. Mm-hmm. Spending too much time alone in New York.
In terms of Hansen versus Predator, when you got that off the ground, there was a kind of a crowdfunding, and it didn't reach the target, but you still got to make the show, and you guys had 11 arrests. Is that correct, through it? We
did. We had 11 arrests, and that was the one, in fact, where the fellow I knew from the train surfaced. And it was, again, another eye-opening investigation. We had a fellow who's on the list to become a police officer in Connecticut, who worked for one of the cable companies, who showed up and had a kit in his car that contained a loaded gun, rope, duct tape, a camera. And, he had said online he was going to take a 13-year-old girl for driving lessons in a parking lot. So what happens, if we're not there and a 13-year-old girl is there? It's also the investigation where Jeff Sokol showed up with the pizza, which, has become rather iconic.
Yeah. Somebody asked the question, did you eat any of the pizza? I know the answer to this.
No. We did, actually. My oldest son was one of the camera crew on that show, and he had gone to school in the area, and the guy was going to stop and get pizza. I said, "What pizza should we send him to?" And he said, "Well, this one over there." And I said, "Okay, great." And that's where the decoy sent him, and it was great because the police could be there monitoring it, and we knew pretty much when he was on his way from the pizza place. But yeah, no pizza. That was surreal. That's
how much detail goes into a show. Like you're monitoring that guy going to the pizza place.
Oh yeah, and it's a combination. So we have cameras all over the place, and obviously our team has the ability to do data mining, and with law enforcement there, it has the ability to do data mining. For instance, when in the most recent investigation in Michigan, when the prison guard showed up, we knew he worked for the Department of Corrections before he got there because we had done the background on him. And, typically, I find stuff out all the time during the course of the interview, but typically, in those cases, for the most part, I know the answer to the question before I ask it.
What advice would you give to parents these days with children online, and what particular apps and different things like that? Or is there none of them off limits?
Well, I think you have to be careful with the apps that kids have. I think you have to realize that these games are interactive. And I think you have to start with a discussion, age appropriate. And it begins with, the very first time your kids go online. And you have to say something to the effect of, look, you need to know that, one, there are grownups out there who like to trick kids online. And kids don't like to be tricked. And so just because somebody says that they're your age and wants to talk doesn't mean they're really your age. It could be a fat old man in his basement sitting in his underwear surrounded by empty pizza boxes. So not everybody online is who they say they are. And if you don't know somebody in real life, you shouldn't be talking to them or giving out personal details on the internet. It's just plain and simple. And I think that's the starting point. And as kids get older, when I was growing up, the advice was don't talk to strangers. Good advice then, good advice now. But the problem is the person who's a stranger on a Wednesday because they're so adept at grooming children is not a stranger by the time, Friday and Saturday roll around. So it's really being aware. And look, the parents buy the computer, the parents own the computer, the parents are allowed to check the computer. And there are softwares out there that will trigger alerts if personal information is given. There's a lot of great software out there, and there's new stuff that comes out every year. But in terms of sites that are off limits, you got to be careful. This stuff can happen on TikTok. I mean, TikTok's wonderful and entertaining and great, and people get a lot of information from it. YouTube is great and wonderful, but as we've seen, in our Onision and real life investigation on Discovery Plus, there was a guy who was very popular with teen girls, some even younger than teens, who ended up preying upon them, bullying them, abusing them, getting pictures from them, and in some cases having relationships with, kids who were as young as 16 years old. And it happens, it's not just him, it happens over and over again. There's a guy we profiled in a YouTube piece that came out just last week who professes that it's okay to have intimate relationships with 14-year-old girls. I mean, these guys are out there, and YouTube allows this to happen.
Yeah,
in many cases.
Funny you should mention that. I uploaded a clip on YouTube about an hour ago, and I had a member of the European Parliament, a politician, on my podcast last week, and he's a big advocate for the legalization of marijuana in Ireland. So I put the clip up, and it got flagged, and I got an email saying people are going to have to sign in and be 18 to view that clip. So when you're telling me something like that, it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'll give you something that's even more absurd. So the 3 Predator investigation segments that are on my YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, are limited monetization because of content, yet these guys are out there saying and doing all kinds of other horrible stuff that is fully monetized. What sense does that make? Now, I get that I've been a thorn in YouTube's side and taken on the CEO and challenged them on many different levels, but I have a piece up now, the latest show, that was flagged for the video insert that was put together by another content creator who also has that part of the show on his channel. It's monetized there, but not on my channel. So you do the math on that. You tell me what's going on there.
Yeah, it's weird that they're holding back on monetization when it's your own content as well.
Yeah, and again, it's I don't do YouTube to make money. I do YouTube because it's it started with getting a foot in that space because I thought it was something I should do, and suddenly we were on to a couple different investigations, and you end up with 360,000 subscribers and 20 million views, and you feel a responsibility to feed this thing, and so I do, and I try to come up with creative, clever content. But if I was just a YouTuber, which I'm not, clearly, because I get criticized by YouTubers all the time, I would be in trouble if that's what I counted on for money.
Do you want to talk to me about Have a Seat and your podcast as well?
The podcast is really been a great experience for me because we go back into these cases, sometimes, 15, 16, 17 years old, and I immerse myself back into them, and we reach out to the people involved, and we figure out where the fellow is today and what's happened to him since then. And I find myself getting lost in the research of it all. And then I talk about it for the purposes of that episode of the podcast. And it is really become popular with people because, one, they like to hear the story behind the story, and they also like to know what's happened to this guy since then. Sometimes they're dead, sometimes they turn their life around, they become artists or successful in other fields, and sometimes they reoffend and stay in trouble. We do interviews with some of the people who've been involved in the investigations. We're trying to do interviews with some of the predators themselves. And again, it's a reminder to people that it's important to understand how this works. When you talk about the drug problem in Ireland or America or wherever, you can talk about demand reduction. You can talk about treating addiction as a sickness and not a crime. When you talk about predator-like behavior and guys going after children, preying upon children, this isn't a glamorous part of medicine. Thank God we have people working for the federal government, and they go into prisons and they talk to these guys and try to figure it out. But it's not, a Park Avenue medical practice typically. So demand reduction isn't, a big cure-all for this particular crime anywhere in the world. So what you need is education. And your best defense is to educate your kids and to have parents aware and to have this dialogue and to understand as best you can what these guys are about. And I think the podcast provides a bit of that to people. And I think that's why it's resonated with so many.
Do you find that many people have changed their lives since then, or what's the percentage like?
Well, the percentage is difficult to determine just because there's so many guys and we're, fairly early on in the process of doing the podcast. So, we started in earnest in January, and we do, a new episode every week. So, maybe we're 21 of them so far, and we've got, 380 more to go. And so I got a little bit of work ahead of me, but I do think that at some point I'm hoping that, good or bad, that some of these predators will come on the show and do an interview and let me get inside their heads and realize that what they're doing is a service to people to understand what happened to them and why. And I think it'd just be helpful to society, to the listeners, to parents, to, everybody involved here.
Can you see that happening? Can you see many people going for that?
I think we're going to get some. There are a lot of requests out there. There's some discussions going on with people. If you got caught in one of these things, would you want to come on and relive it all again? Probably not. Yeah. But I think there are a couple in particular who I think are close to saying yes. And I think it'd be fascinating. I think it'd be important.
And we'll look forward to seeing it. So you're saying you're going to be filming some more stuff, are you?
We are. We're in the process of discussions right now that'll determine where they're going to air. And once we get that green light, we'll start filming some more.
Yeah. Chris, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today on the podcast.
Thanks, Maurice. A pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it was an absolute brilliant show, and thanks a million for your time, man.
Anytime. I'll look you up if I get over there soon.
Yeah, do. We'll go for some pints.
Yeah, absolutely. Done and done.